Everyone, and welcome to our session this evening. We would be looking, as Annalisa said, at trauma, loss, and grief in adults. Dr. Moore had looked at the same topic, but as it affects children. So basically, the objectives are to really help and assist participants in their understanding of trauma, loss, and grief. To help participants identify the similarities and the differences in trauma, loss, and grief, and to assist participants in implementing healing strategies in trauma, in loss, and in grief. We would hold our questions towards the end so that we can go through the session, particularly now that we're retapings for other people. So at the end, we would have all our questions. So let's look at what is trauma, particularly for those who maybe did not attend Dr. Moore's session. So something would qualify to be traumatic when the event is unexpected. You couldn't see it coming, as we say in the Caribbean. It was sudden. It's actually potentially life-threatening. You feel that you have little or no control over the event, right? So for instance, you might be walking the street and let's say a drunk driver is coming down the road and you see a car coming towards you. There is no place for you to run. You have no control over this event. It's life-threatening. It's unexpected. It's sudden. Or like the hurricane that happened in the Bahamas last year. Yes, we are accustomed with hurricanes in the Caribbean, but we're not accustomed with hurricanes hanging around for 2 days. We're not accustomed to hurricanes with wind gusts, overlasting, of 200 and 160, lasting a long time. Usually they come, they do their destruction and they go. But, we don't have hurricanes hanging around like almost a friend to the environment, just stay there. Something could be traumatic when we are unable to respond to the event. So as the example I gave of the car or the hurricane, you can't respond. You basically freeze, right? That might happen. You're directly involved in the event. So it's affecting you, it's happening to you. Or you may not be directly involved in the event. Let's say you are in your window upstairs and you see that happening on the street. The car is on the street, it's affecting somebody else, but you're seeing it. It's like you're there. So you're paralyzed by what you're seeing also, because there's a normal instinct in us to help others, especially when they're in danger. So if you're upstairs in the window and you're seeing that and you can't get downstairs on time, you yourself might freeze as a result. It causes stress that exceeds your normal coping capacity. Usually you could handle stuff, but this one, it took you by surprise for one, unexpected. You can't do anything, out of control. So the normal things you would do, you just can't do it, okay? So that basically would be what trauma is. If you're looking at what trauma is, so let's go over that. It's unexpected, it's life-threatening, it's happening to you or to somebody you know, or you see it happening. It overwhelms your natural capacity to cope. Okay? And basically, when we are in a traumatic situation, because we are wired, so to speak, I am not going to do a lot of the brain work tonight, but our brain is wired in such a way that when we are in those situations, we have three responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Now, all of these responses are very good responses. They are basically what I like to call the emergency responses of the body. But let's look at that before we even move into the grief part of it. Let's look at that. If you think of what emergency vehicles are, your emergency vehicles are your fire engine, right? Your fire trucks and your ambulances. I hesitate to say police, but I will say police. And listen why I hesitate to say police, because some police put on their sirens when they're going to drop their children to school. It has nothing to do with no emergency. Some police put on their sirens, not because they're going to some drug bust or any kind of thing like that, or some murder down the road, or to save somebody. They just want to drive fast and they're fed up with the traffic. But let's talk about the real emergency that we have no ambiguity about. So a fire truck, and you hear a fire siren, and you see a truck going down the road and all the men on it, right? So these emergency vehicles, when we see them, it tells us something is happening, and we get into action, right? So when something is happening to us, the body moves into this emergency response, which is fight, flight, or freeze. Let's look at how they are made to save us. So let me use myself as an example. I'm very much afraid of dogs. So if I see a dog coming and I have no stick in my hand, I will run. Fight, flight. If I have a stick, I might hit the dog. Fight. Or I might be so frightened that I freeze. Now, these three responses are responses to save us. So you see the car coming, and it's coming down at breakneck speed, as we say, and you see the man is out of control, you run. You might yell and scream, which is a kind of fight, a verbal fight. Ask the man what he's doing. What are you doing? You crazy or something? Right? Or we might be so frightened that we freeze. These emergency responses are there for the situation, for us to respond to the situation in a way that it would save us. We are not meant to have those responses all the time. Just as how you don't hear the emergency vehicles in your countries all the time. You hear it when there is a need for it. It's the same thing for us. But when we are traumatized, particularly developmental trauma, when we are traumatized as children, and we have this traumatic response all the time, it's like our emergency vehicles or emergency responses are always on edge. And any little thing triggers those responses. Any little thing triggers those responses. Okay? So that's the major thing to learn about trauma. Now let us look at the difference then with grief. So with grief is basically a natural response to loss. It's an emotional suffering, if you want to call it that we feel when we lose somebody or something that is significant to us. So when we feel grief, grief registers for us loss. I like to say about our feelings are like I like to say they're like guardian angels. They tell us something about ourselves. So if I feel happy, very joyful, is because most likely I have gotten something that I always wanted. I always wanted to pass my exam, and I've passed my exams. So I feel happy, and it moves me to something. It moves me maybe to call my teacher and thank her. It moves me to tell my parents thanks very much for all of the stress they went through with me and all of the nights they stayed up with me. Well, grief also tells us something. Grief tells us, look, we have lost somebody that is really significant. Right? It registers space, a vacuum. Right? And we begin to experience these overwhelming feelings. It is this emotional suffering, I said, that we feel when somebody we love or something we love is taken away from us. And it may bring on other feelings like shock, disbelief, anger. So all of these kinds of unexpected emotions could just flood our system. And I want to say to you, I don't want you to think of those feelings in terms of a hierarchy. You know, sometimes we make the mistake and we feel that we should feel a certain feeling first. No. The body doesn't work like that. The body doesn't work like that, right? So nobody could tell you, well, oh, your mother died and look at you, you're laughing. Or are you still going to this thing, or you're doing this, or you're doing that? You know, they expect you to be crying, but maybe you might be in shock. Maybe the person you're dealing with is in shock. Or the person is very angry and you're saying, but God gives and God has taken away. So why are you angry? You had the person for 13 years, 90 years. You had the person for this, you had the person for that. These things are irrational where this is concerned. Or the person might be experiencing fear, not knowing what tomorrow will bring with the absence of this person or the absence of this thing that was so precious. May bring on anxiety. You know? And profound sadness. So those are some of the feelings that will go with grief. Grief can be very disruptive to our well-being. So grief can really, in terms of our own physical makeup, grief could really bring, introduce insomnia. We're not sleeping properly. Or sometimes you go to visit somebody who's just lost a loved one and you ask them, have you eaten? And they say, no. When last have you eaten? Well, since 2 days ago. I only drank something since. So it affects our eating. Most people eat less, or they just don't eat. Very few people eat more. Very few, but you could have those responses. It is even difficult to think straight. You know what we mean by that in the Caribbean? You can't focus enough to get things done. Your short-term memory is affected. You don't know where you put the keys. You're looking for, papers to take to maybe to get the death registered or something like that, but you can't find it, you can't find this, you can't find that. You know, you just came with a bill, or you don't know if you left it, you know, whether in the hospital because you had gone to see that loved one, or whether where you put things, so your short-term memory sometimes is gone, right? Now, death is a major loss and a real life changer. That is really a major loss. It leaves us, it leaves us really feeling that we can't manage. We can't manage. I remember somebody saying to me that the only time they felt that the earth under their feet had moved was when they lost their daddy, when they lost their father. So it's a real life changer. And I like to use it as almost the biggest metaphor to understand all losses. But there are other losses that may not be significant as death is, but have the same effect on us. So coping with loss for someone that we love is one of the biggest challenges, as I said, but there are many other losses that we could talk about. Loss of health. You know, we have a bad accident, God forbid, that gets us paralyzed from our neck down, you know, and we lying on a bed, paraplegic, we can't get up. Well, that's a significant loss. That's a loss of all kinds of things, a loss of your independence, a loss of your sense of even sometimes worthfulness, you know, feeling that, you know, you're able to do things for yourself and you have that security that you could take. Now you have to depend on everybody. Now you have to depend. And some people really find that difficult, depending on others. So that loss of self-sufficiency. I also want to say to us that if we are in a family where somebody is terminally ill, or somebody has had a very bad accident that, you know, have them laid up for a while, or they've lost a limb or something like that, then we as family members or friends, we enter into what one would call anticipated grief. We start to grieve, you know, especially if the person is terminally ill. We begin to grieve. We begin to think about, well, you know, they will pass. They will die one day, or this will happen, or that will happen, you know. Parents go through anticipated grief when they have children that are severely handicapped and they themselves are sick, and, you know, death for them is near. You know, they don't only, most times they're not grieving because they're going to die or feel sad about that, but they're grieving because they don't know what will happen to that loved one that needs so much care. Job, loss of financial stability, the loss of financial security, a sense of safety, a sense of independence. Right? And we put all of those stresses together. That is why we say we have a pandemic of mental health issues. A lot of, you know, I was listening to the news the other night, and it's true, one of the countries in the world that have the most suicide has always been Japan, for some reason. But right now, Japan has lost more people, 2,000 plus, to suicide than they lost through the COVID. That really shook me into a whole different kind of reality. So we have to be mindful of the people around us. We have to be mindful when we see people down, and we'll talk a little bit later about that, the difference between depression and grief. Okay? But these things are very, very stressful, and it brings about a lot of grief and a lot of pain for people. So we may feel depressed if we're grieving, but depression is really not grief. When we are experiencing depression, you know, we have no taste, as we say in the Caribbean. We have no taste for life or for living. That constant feeling of emptiness. With grief, grief is like the waves of an ocean, right? Just imagine, all of us from the Caribbean have seen the sea, and we know what the sea is like. Well, grief comes in waves. So now we're feeling, oh God, I'm going to die. Next 2 minutes is like the wave went down. You know, we're okay. We could cope. We're going along with life, right? And maybe the next 10 minutes, something trigger the sense of death. We may smell a perfume that this loved one used to use, or somebody passed wearing a shirt that our dad used to use, or our husband used to use, or our grandpa used to use, you know, so it's something triggers it, and then it goes. But with depression, that emptiness stays. That feeling of despair, that loneliness stays. That sense of hopelessness and feeling a sense of almost worthlessness. I am not deserving to be alive. It is a preoccupation. And it may turn out into suicidal ideation, this preoccupation with death and dying. You know, you might hear people talk about, well, it's better I had died than this one had died. You know, it's better I go too. You know, sometimes the language they use don't use the word death, but it speaks of an ending. It speaks of an ending. For instance, we may say, it ain't make no sense being here. Life ain't worth it anymore. Right? There is nothing there to think about or to live for. So what is this all about? It ain't making sense anymore. You know? Or they may talk about, well, that loved one is in a better place than me. They're happier than me. You know, so you may be hearing things like that. That might be the kind of language. Whereas with grief, we feel overwhelmed by our sadness, but we still don't lose that sense of hope entirely. We don't lose that sense of wanting to live. We just want this pain that we're feeling, this psychological pain that we're feeling, we just want it to pass. But with depression, we even lose energy to work at making it pass. Whereas with grief, we try to get over it. Depression, we don't even have the energy to get over it. Okay? And then you may find that some people take their depression to bed. So they're always in the bed. They lie down all the time. They have nothing to get up for because they don't have the energy. Okay? So thoughts of suicide might be nagging them, you know, that feeling of guilt, you know, I'm not worthy to be alive, or wasting my time, or wasting people's time, you know, wasting my parents' time, or wasting my partner's time, you know, or just taking up space. The inability to function at home or at school, if you're looking at it in a teenager. And loss of interest in friends. You know, so they're not calling their friends anymore, or their friends calling, and you know, say, well, your phone is ringing, you know, I think it's your friend calling. I don't want to speak to anybody. Okay, and you see that going on constantly, consistently. That loss, that disinterest, really, that disinterest in connecting. Which is strange, because now, because of the COVID and the lockdown, we want to connect. So if you find people who doesn't want to connect now, and they just lose interest, it should really ring a bell. It should really raise a red flag for you, you know, as to what is going on. And then if you see the sense of the personal self-care, the hygiene is going down. They're in the bed, and they didn't get up for like almost 2 days. They didn't bathe. They didn't change their clothes. You say, well, change your clothes now, honey, change your clothes. They have no interest in changing their clothes. So they're really not eating. They're not sleeping well. They're just in their bed, you know, not connecting with friends, right? And not taking care of themselves. Now, everyone's journey with grief is unique. Nobody has the same pattern. And it is based on all kinds of things. Our personality, our coping ability, you know, history, all of those things, nobody could tell you that there is a right way to grieve and a wrong way to grieve, or there is a time to stop grieving. That's dangerous language when people start telling you, hey, you're still grieving about that, you're still talking about that, you're still, you know, you're still doing this or you're still doing that. Okay, I think we have to.
Please mute your mic, Justina. Please mute your mic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So but there are healthy ways and unhealthy ways to deal with grief, to deal with the grieving process. So even though people cannot tell you how to grieve, when to grieve, or how long to grieve for, we know that there are healthy ways and unhealthy ways to grieve. So, healthy ways to grieve. What could be some of the healthy ways to grieve? One, we have to acknowledge our pain. If we don't acknowledge our pain, then what do we do with it? We escape from it. We hide it. We bury it. And we may escape from it in ways that are harmful to us. So we may escape from it. Some people start drinking. You know, all the things we use to kind of anesthetize our sense, to numb us from our feelings. And all of us could go through our own heads and think about how we numb ourselves, right? Some people numb themselves by doing things that are healthy, but still is a numbing. They still have to stop and acknowledge it, right? So let me explain that. I do a lot of gardening. But I have to know when my gardening is good and healthy for me, or when this is an escape from feelings I don't want to deal with. And you have to ask yourself the same thing. You know, when is this behavior helpful to me, and when is this behavior a cop-out? Right? So we have to face the pain. I always say this, and you may remember that. We have to name it, name what it is. We have to claim it. This is my pain. Name, claim, and tame. I always say that. If we don't name something, we have very little power over it. If we don't claim it as my feeling and we pass it on to everybody, even onto the universe, then I have less power over it. But if I name it, I know what it is, I claim it, this is my situation, then I can work with it. That's what I mean by tame. I can work with it. It doesn't have to override me. I can work with it bit by bit, right? You know, it's like putting a big hamburger in your mouth. You know, you can't make one big bite. You bite a little piece at a time. But sometimes with grief, we have to do that, a little piece at a time. That would be a healthy way to begin to deal with it. Another thing people do which is also unhealthy. We try to, we do it out of our own goodness. We try to save our children or other family members from feeling badly. So we don't talk about the dead person, because if we talk about the loss, you know, somebody's going to feel sad. And that, you know, there is a myth about if we start crying, we won't stop. You ever started crying and never stop? Ask yourself that. You must laugh at yourself, you know, because the answer is always no. We may cry for a long time, but we never start crying and never stop. If I tell you this thing, you know, it's going to upset me for days. It might upset you for days, but you're living longer than days. You know, so you have to look at that. Yes, it's going to upset you, but it's not going to upset you for your life. So we have to deal with it, right? Grief is a sign pointing out a path to healing. Grief is not a dead-end street. Grief is not the end of it. Grief is the process to get to a way of recognizing our loved ones. And there are many things we can do to help us grieve. Many healthy things we can do to help us grieve. So one, don't think we're saving other people when we don't talk about it, especially with children, because if adults don't talk about their pain, you know what happens? Children don't feel the freedom to talk about their pain. But if you say, you know, I really miss daddy, I really miss daddy. Do you miss daddy? So you could have a normal conversation. I really miss granny. I miss my mother. You miss granny? You have this normal conversation. Because if they never see you, they never hear you talk, they never see your sadness, they will feel they have to protect you too. So imagine the children trying to protect you, you trying to protect them. It never happens. I also want to bring in the thing about when a husband and a wife or two partners, you know, partners lose a child. In my experience of as a therapist, you know, many marriages go down the drain. Many relationships break up. Why? Because they never sit and talk about the loss. Sometimes they blame each other in the head for the loss of this child. Whether that's a miscarriage, whether that's, you know, any kind of, you know, other forms of death, you know, at a different age of a child. But I have seen many couples, and when I ask them, when did that start? You know, many times it goes back to when they had lost a child and never spoke about it. So that's a silence that needs to be broken, to talk about it. Yes, men grieve differently. I know that, you know, they take much more inside. Women, when they're in a better space, they begin to speak a little more, you know, and the men want to know, what do I wash them out, you know? But at the same time, to begin to have a conversation. So I wanted to mention that as it came to my mind, because it's a very important thing. Coping with loss and grief. So let's talk about a few things that you can do, that you don't need to go to a therapist about, but you can do. So face your feelings, express your feelings. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel. Your feelings are generated by yourself, by what you think, by who you are, by what's going on for you. Look after your health. Look after your health. There is no victory or gold medal since somebody died for me to boast and say, you know, since you died, I ain't eat. I ain't eat self. You know, not eating, you know, telling somebody I didn't eat self is not a way of saying, you know, I so loved her that I can't eat, or I didn't eat as a proof of something. No. You have to take care of yourself. Draw on your faith. Draw on your faith. I think my experiences in the Caribbean, that when people die, you know, some of us who may never have thought about God, it raises a question about the beyond. It raises a question as to what happens next. You know, and what happens next is an ultimate question of faith. You know, what happens next, right? So that we can ask ourselves, you know, plan ahead. Let me explain what I mean by plan ahead. It's very difficult to go through that because we continue anticipating, like for instance, their birthday. Person's birthday is coming up. So long, 2 months, 3 months before their birthday coming up, we in pain already, right? Wedding anniversary, the birth of a child, you know, particular things that you did together. So plan ahead. You know, so if you know you want to, the birthday is coming up and what you want to do is to have a birthday cake and invite family, do it. Don't let it just creep up on you and slap you in your face with more grief. You want to get flowers to go to the cemetery, to put on the grave, do that. Don't wait and then the day come, you know, oh God, look at, you know, it's 1 year now, you know, it's 5 years now, I ain't go by the cemetery, I ain't go this, oh Lord. And you start to feel guilty and the grief is there and all kinds of stuff. You're complicating the story. So preempt yourself and plan ahead, okay? So that's what planning ahead means, that you anticipate those moments that's going to trigger strong memories of the death, or the passing of that person, or the loss of some significant thing that has caused you a lot of pain, right? So you want to plan ahead. You don't want it to creep up on you and kind of just take away, you know, your life at that time. I mean, take away how you're dealing with it. Then some major questions to settle, and that comes much more out of a philosophical thought than it comes out of psychology. But the way you have to deal with it is basically psychological. So this is going to help you face your pain. What is loss? You know, for you to sit down and don't do that as one exercise as if you're in school, right? Take as much time, because remember, grief is a process. Take as much time as you need with it. What is loss? Okay, I even lost a sense, you know, seeing them sitting on that rocking chair. You know, real things that you lost. You know, I lost hearing their voice. You know, every morning when Granny woke up, she sang Amazing Grace. I miss hearing that. I didn't like it when she used to sing it, you know, but I miss hearing it. Or, you know, when he used to come from work, as soon as he parked this car, all I hear is what the children? He used to fret me, but I miss this. Whatever. So you put down all that you miss, all that you have lost, right? Maybe the person only took off the garbage. They threw the garbage. Well, somebody has to be assigned this role, as the garbage will stay there. So that's something you lost. So think about all the things that you've lost. And as I said, you don't go through it as if you're going through school and it's an exam. You don't put yourself under this pressure. It's a process of healing. So you're going to do it slowly. When you have done that and you've faced that kind of raw pain, then what's left? You go back and you ask yourself, what's left? Well, we have 3 lovely children out of this relationship. That's left. That man never raised his voice. I learned something from that. That's left. You start to think about all the things that are left. What's left? You know? So physical things, psychological things, spiritual things, meaning values and all those things, what's left? And you go through that and you write it down, what's left. So you're going through this process. What's left? And if you have a very good friend, or if you're seeing a psychologist, you could talk with them about these things. And when you have gone through that and you realize, you're feeling a place where, yes. Then you move to the last question, what's possible? Well, many things are possible. Many things are possible. So some even very simple things are possible. You know, this person used to like a particular food. You may really celebrate this person by cooking this particular food at a particular time. You're right. Why can't you remember the person that way? That's possible. That person always wanted to do this, so maybe you're going to do that. But what is also possible for you? How could you reconstruct your life? How could you make your life go on? What's possible for you? You know, a lot of women depend on men, their partners, their husbands. Sometimes they do all of the banking, they pay the credit card, they pay the this, they pay all the this, they pay all the that. And then some women just stay out of it. Well, it's possible for you to learn. Instead of for you panicking, it's possible for you to learn. Or maybe this person did all the painting for Christmas, did all the fixing around, did all this, that. But what's possible? Could you, are these things that you could learn? So think about what's possible. He used to do all the driving, or she used to do all the driving. Well, is it possible for you to learn to drive rather than leave the car sitting in the garage or thinking of selling it? What's possible? So don't let the death shut down your life. Let that space when you've worked through the pain of it, you know, and it's not feeling so vacant anymore and so empty. What could you do with it? The space is an opportunity. It's not a betrayal of the person. It's not a betrayal. You know, some people feel they could never date again after their husband died, or vice versa. Although for men sometimes it's easier for them, especially if they're left with young children, they marry quickly. But some women, I remember my mother, she was wearing her wedding ring, you know, and I said to my father died at 50 years old. So my mother was younger than my father. I even said to her, I said, you're not thinking about dating somebody? And she looked like me, showed me her finger, and she said, I am married. My husband is in heaven. I am married. And she thought I was trying to get rid of her somehow. No. But how do you relive your life? Well, she did relive her life. She didn't get remarried, but I could see that she put a lot of her energy back into her nursing, and she did a lot of things. So what's possible for you? Okay. And then there are fun things you can do to help you work through this. You can use art to express your feelings. So a lot of people can't speak about their feelings, but you could express your feelings. So let me just give you a quick way to do that. You know, so if you want to access your feeling, you can just ask yourself, you know, if I had to draw my feeling, I wonder what shape it would be. And you just close your eye and you draw any shape. So we are talking about squares and circles and stuff. Shape, just let your hand take what's in your heart, what you're feeling, and put it on the paper. If that feeling had a color, what color would it be? Well, if you don't have colors, you just write what colors it would be. Or if you have colors, you color it. If it had a voice, if that feeling had a voice, what would it say? Write down what it would say. To whom would it say it? Write down who it would say it to. If it had a weight to it, I wonder how much it would weigh. Write down the poundage. And then you want to rework that. If I had to change this feeling, let's say it was a negative feeling, I want to change this feeling. If I had to change this feeling, what would I change this feeling to become? And you do the same process in the reverse. I am particularly teaching you things that you can use for yourself. I want you to use it for yourself before you use it with anybody else. Okay, but simple things. You could make a loving memory jar. This is a jam bottle, you know, just covered with some it's looking fancy, but it's real recycled things, you know. The same sponges, the little sponges that you use to wipe your sink. Well, that's what these things are. You know, so you cut a little heart to show that you really love this person, you know, decorate it the way you want to decorate it, maybe in the colors that they like. And you could just drop things in it, write things in it, memories, pleasant memories you have of that person. Or even memories, things that you have to forgive. Or things that you regret. A lot of times, a lot of our grief is about what we didn't do with this person, the time we wasted, the time we didn't tell them that we loved them enough. So we're feeling guilty, we have regrets. Well, tell them, put it in the jar. All right? I always wanted to tell you that. And I didn't tell you enough how much I love you. I always wanted to tell you I really did forgive you. Or I didn't forgive you, but now I know I forgive you. Because remember, forgiveness is not for the person, it's for you. Right? Because we hold people in our hearts. Sometimes they don't even know we're holding them in our hearts. So we can still forgive people after they die. We could plant a garden of our feelings or a garden of our memory, the memory of the person. We could do a garden for this person. We could plant various things. And it's a nice thing as a family, you could get involved with the children about and say, today we planted a little garden, you know, in memory of granny or in memory of daddy or in memory of mommy or whoever, or in memory of the dog that died. I know in the Caribbean, and sometimes when children lose pets and they're really grieving, we say to them, so what? It's a dog. No, 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 no. They're feeling as much pain. It's a pet that they really got close to, and you don't know the amount of comfort they got from that pet. So we can't brush it away. It's an opportunity to teach them to grieve well. So yeah, we will do a little flower garden around, you know, Scotty's burial place. We can write, we can do sentences, we can help ourselves. If I could change things, I would. When I'm alone, what? Or when I feel lonely, or what I remember most. Or we could do healing journals, you know? I am really missing. I find it helpful when. So we could do those things. It's all ways to help people grieve in a healthy way. And then obviously we could hold up our losses to God and turn our pain into prayer. We have this wonderful example of Jesus in Gethsemane, taking his own pain and his impending loss of losing friends and dying to basically just questioning God, you know, why should this be happening to me? Right? Remember, made 3 trips to those friends. All you can stay with me, stay up with me, stay up with me. Harassing his guys, you know, stay up with me, stay up with me. And they were too sleepy. Sometimes our friends don't know how to respond to our grief. A lot of people tell you, but you should forget that, come on, go out with me, because they really don't know what is appropriate to say. You know, they just don't know what is appropriate to say. Or you're a young man. I remember working with a client who had lost his wife, and he was at work, and he went out to the coffee room, the lunch room, and he was staring in the window, and these other guys came in and they saw him staring in the window, and they said to him, oh, man, what are you looking for outside there? Why are you looking so? And he said, man, today's a hard day for me. I'm looking for I'm really thinking about my wife. And you won't believe the response he got. Man, oh, she dead over 6 months now. Just look outside of the grass. Yeah, woman outside there as much as the grass. And he told me if he could have left his job that very day, if he didn't need the money, he was going to leave it. He had never heard such a dismissive, painful, disrespectful response as that. But that is because we just don't know how to deal with people's pain and grief, because we ourselves don't deal with ours. If we know how to deal with ours, trust me, we will know how to deal with other people's. So don't let anybody force you. So if that is your tradition, you know, the Christian tradition, that's where you go with that. If that's not your tradition, you find other ways to deal with it. All right? So struggle, surrender, you know, to bring your distress to God, to pray about it, pray about the pain, pray about the healing. To transform your grief, to let it become something new for you. But because grief has that power. And one thing, as I say that grief has that power, let me explain something to you. The good thing about grief is, for all of the griefs that all of the losses we've never grieved, if we start paying attention when our grief comes up and we work with it, guess what? It becomes deeper and more solid, because all of the grief that has been inside of us that we had never worked with, we now will work with it. And that is the blessing about really addressing it, okay? And if you really want to look at something, the Psalm, you know, especially Job, you know, when Job had so much losses and he complained bitterly, you know, to God. You know, we may not be able to complain bitterly to other people, but we could complain bitterly to God. If you read the Psalms, there are basically two kinds of Psalms. Psalms that praise God and Psalms that lament. So in times of grief, you can read the Psalms of lamentation, you know. Or you could just even pray, my God, why have you forsaken me? That you pray during Lent. But you know, you need a space and a place and a person to express yourself to, in order that your grief be transformed, in order that your loss be healed, in order that you can somehow hope again and hold on to a future. A different future, of course. So that's it in terms of the presentation. I am now all yours for questions.
Thank you so much, Sister Julie. This is Karen Moore here.
Yes, Dr. Moore.
Hi. I'm the coordinator of the Franciscan Institute. I had to come in late, so I was not here at the beginning, but I did hear most of it. I was very happy to hear it. I just want to invite people to please either unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can put questions in the chat as well. So either one of those. So please feel free to start the ball rolling with any questions on the presentation.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
This
Good
is
evening.
Alana from Trinidad. Thank you for that really insightful presentation. I took notes even though you were recording. My question is, when we were talking about depression and grief and learning to recognize signs, the thing is, you know, self-diagnosis is so tricky, especially when you're in a place where you're maybe not thinking very clearly. And so I feel like if the lines are still blurred between knowing, okay, I'm depressed and I need to do something about it versus, you know, I'm grieving and this is a natural process.
Thanks for the question. No, so if that feeling of no energy, feeling lost, no desire to connect with people, friends, or anything like that, you know, you want to stay in your bed, you're not eating, or those kinds of things, you have no desire to even get up and change your clothes, you know, and that's going on for a long time. It's getting progressively worse. then I would say look at it. Because grief, as I said, it's really the process of grieving, and grief itself is almost like the waves of the sea. You know, so now you feel bad, as if, oh God, you want to die. And then the next 10 minutes, you know, something else, you think of something else that person used to do, and you have a little sense of pleasure. That doesn't mean to say that it lasts long and it lasts forever, but the rhythm of grief, if you're working with it, you can see progression. It changes. Whereas depression, if you're not paying attention to it and attending to it, it gets worse. And you lose more of the skills of coping than you used to have. Whereas with grief, as you start working with it, those coping skills start to come back. I would say that for me is very differentiated.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
One last question about that depression. When depression gets to debilitating states, most people, you know, they can't even recognize it to pull themselves out of it. At that point, you know, I mean, if someone's not lucid enough to say, like, I'm depressed, I need help, what's the, I guess, hoping somebody else notices, or hoping that somebody who knows now, like the people who attended the presentation, look out for it in somebody else?
Yes, that would be good. You know, we are social beings. We're meant for community. Hopefully, we have. I mean, it will grieve me if I believe that we have people that are so isolated that you know, nobody would notice that. You know, you didn't see somebody for a long time, and that you used to see them, or that person used to call you and they've not called for a long time, they've not WhatsApp you, they've not made it. Reach out, especially during this time. Reach out, you know, find out what's going on. You could do that without being intrusive, you know. And then if you're living with the person and you notice that kind of deterioration, then yes, before it gets to a place where, you know, they themselves can ask for help, you know, approach them and say, you know, I've noticed these things. Do have you felt that in for yourself? But I'm noticing these things, you know, maybe the last 4 days you've not changed your clothes, your friends call, you didn't take the call, you know, you're not eating, or you're eating, you know, less, you're looking sad, you know, that sad, you know, that look, that kind of you know, sometimes blank stare or whatever you find, you know, especially if you live with a person, you will see behavioral changes, and, you know, ask them, you know, are you okay? How are you feeling? Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know, Dr. Mo, you have anything to add here?
No, I have nothing to add. We do have a couple more questions in the chat. We
Okay.
have, when someone is dealing with a sudden death and others say be strong, how best can you respond to this?
When someone is dealing with a sudden death and others say be strong.
Yes. How
Okay.
best can you respond to this?
Mind your business. No. That's meant to be a joke. Let me tell you, be strong. You know, people are saying that because they just don't know what is appropriate to say. Death is a hard thing to talk about because it raises issues for other people. Okay, so when they say be strong, just say, you know, I am doing the best I can, and you're seeing me in my space of strength. I'm trying. It might not look so for you, but particularly if you're being honest and you're trying, you know, or even explore with them what be strong means. Yeah, okay, help me understand what being strong is. You tell me be strong. Help me understand what it is to be strong in the face of death. Open the conversation, you will see they might leave you and run. But open the conversation, you know. Yeah, that's interesting, be strong. So what would that look like? What being strong would look like in the face of death?
Thank you, Sister Julie. There's a second one. How do you help someone grieving a loved one who had no faith? And I
The
don't,
loved one had no faith, or the person grieving have no faith?
I'm not sure. I don't know if Tina, this is your question, if you could clarify that, if it's the person grieving.
The loved one had no faith.
Okay, okay. You know, I would deal with that from the perspective of, look, even though the loved one had no faith, you know, we just don't know the full story of a relationship between people and God, or whoever, whatever tradition they're from. Because I am always very careful about that, because I can't read into that. I look at behaviors. There are a lot of people that don't talk about God, but their behaviors are very, very, in inverted commas, godly. And when I put it in inverted commas, I don't mean it as negative. I wanted to do it in respect to the person. Because they won't, if they don't believe in God, they don't want me to use God by them, you know, in relationship to them. But we have to look at behaviors. You know, what is the greatest? The greatest is love, you know, justice, mercy. You know, did that person live that way? You know, so we have to leave that and just look at the evidence of their life. So there are a lot of good people outside there that never use the word God or faith.
Okay, thank you for that. I am not seeing anything else in the chat at this point. I don't know if other people have, oh, yes, there is.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Yes, hello. Excuse me. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Ms. Peters. I have a question. I know somebody who had lost a child, a very young child, about 1.5 years, and it has been eight years now. And, you know, you mentioned that, you know, there's no timeline on how long you deal with grief. But I wonder, and you also mentioned about there's good, supportive, healthy ways to deal with grief, and there's others that maybe don't necessarily help you to kind of get through it. And I just wonder what this person is, you know, it just seems like they're kind of stuck. And as someone who, I love this person, I want to be there for this person. Is there anything I can say or suggest for her to sort of, her life to kind of maybe open up a bit more? I don't want to come across as, you know, being pushy or, but I just wonder, I just see her as stuck, and I feel, I feel so sorry for her.
Yes, and for, what you describe seems as a little bit of stuckness in truth. You know, and as I spoke before, and I said that when parents have lost children, it's one of the hardest grieving to do, because for one, the natural tendency is for us to think about death in terms of age and stage, you know. So when that has happened, it just throws our thinking off, and it throws our expectations off. Yes. And it's hard to talk about it. But I would, if you have a good enough relationship with this person, I would ask them possibly a question like that. You know, what changed for you since let's call the child Johnny or Mary, since this person died? What changed for you?
Okay.
Yeah. You know, what changed for you? I wouldn't say died. What died for you? But something died. But you know, what changed for you? What changed for you? And then to move it further and say, you know, how could we get back? How could you get back some of these things in your life?
Okay, I love that. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Wow, good evening, Sister Jules. Very, very good presentation. So many light bulbs went up. I just remember I was at a funeral, a 5-year-old child died, and the mother, I go to cry, and the mother, she wasn't crying. And it just really shocked my system. And, I was really worried. But now that, I'm so happy that I've did this journey, coming down, the mental training of the mind. And now I'm really understanding that, you know, people grieve in different ways, and she could have been in shock. And I'm so happy that, you know, I entail on this journey. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Just remember, there is no hierarchy to how we experience feelings. It could be a twin, and both of you lost your parent. You don't have to grieve the same way.
There's a question in the chat
Mm-hmm.
about where can we find resources, places or persons to whom we can go or send someone who might have a hard time with depression or dealing with grief. Are there support groups online or face-to-face?
Okay, well, if the person is interested in some kind of grief therapy face-to-face, and I don't know where that's happening right now, you know, there's a lot of therapy happening online. You could call the Institute for one, and, you know, if it cannot be handled at the Institute, they will definitely try and refer you to someone else. So that's a start. If you know of other persons that would be interested in an online grief group, or, you know, just healing group in terms of grief, that's another thing you could also suggest to the Institute. And, you know, maybe we could talk about that. We'll be open to talking about that. And there might be other online, I think just Google, you know, online grief group, you know, start with a search as wide as that, and most likely something would come up, and you can go from there. I mean, I don't know which island you're from, but there are other, you know, nearly all of the islands have some number of therapists now. Not some don't have as many as others, but if you're in Trinidad, there are many therapists in Trinidad. Dominica should have quite a bit of therapists right now too. I know St. Lucia have quite a bit. Grenada doesn't have as many, but they have a few, you know. So I don't think Antigua has as many likewise, but so just Google and see, and, you know, as I said, start with the Institute, and if we can help, we can help there. And then Tina is offering some help here. The Psychological Society can help find you one. That's Dominica.
All right. And we also have a message, Annalisa Ramsahai, who is the regional program coordinator with the Institute, has put the Institute's contact information in the chat. So thanks, Tina. Thanks, Annalisa. We have a couple more questions. COVID has made it really difficult to get community healing from grief, especially when you are living alone with your deceased husband. How can you get relief from loneliness when you are grieving?
Very, very good question. Again, what would help there would be a group. That is the first thing that comes to my mind. It will also be reaching out to people, whether in your church community or people, you know, in your community that you knew, you know. So even though we are social distancing, we are not socially isolating. So we could try to reach out and, you know, to other people, and you know, people are generally kind. They, at least I like to believe that, and that's my experience. You know, hope just if you're honest, you know, you don't have to tell them everything, but just say, you know, I'm really lonely because my husband died, and I just really looking, you know, just for a chat, maybe just for 5 minutes. You know, you could start with a friend, and let it move from there. You know, or start with your pastor, if you have a pastor, if you belong to a church or a group or any other kind of social group that you might belong to. You know, start there. When we feel lonely, it's hard for us to make that first move, but we have to do that. That's the only way we get out of loneliness. It's like when we mistrust, you know, we're not trusting of people. The only way we learn to trust is by sharing again, you know. but that's the only way. It's hard, but that's the only way. Because people won't know that you're lonely if you only live with your husband and you live alone now, unless you reach out and tell somebody, that's what I'm feeling.
We have another question. What would you advise for a person who has had multiple traumas and or losses at the same time?
Find a therapist and start dealing with it. Because if it is multiple of both, I'm sure that you have a lot of resources, you know, natural resources in terms of the mere fact you raising the question. If the question is about you and you raise the question, I would say this is already a good sign, but try to get some help with it, because you just need somebody else to help walk through these things. Because when we listen to ourselves, all we hear is our own responses that we want to hear sometimes, or responses we have learned that has not been helpful. But somebody else could help us see, you know, it's like a mirror hold up to our faces, and, you know, they could help us see some other dimension. And then trauma work is not, it might be long, but not very hard. I won't call trauma work hard for clients or for therapists. So because it's so much of your brain, and the brain is capable of so much healing and reconstructing. So I would say call a therapist.
We have, I'm not sure if this was already answered, the same person, Deborah Charles Mark, who asked about, you know, when your husband dies and it was
Right,
just the two of you
yes.
in the house, also has mentioned your whole life was based around your husband, no social groups. So I think you might have been saying, Sister Julie, to
Okay,
approach
yes.
social groups. So I guess she wanted to know how to handle that.
Okay, well, my first question, does the husband have family? So if you're, because your husband family or your family will know that all your life was based right around your husband. So I think they might be willing to help us start there, because it seemed to be a safe group. You know, either your husband's family or your family. So start there and work things from there, you know. And other than that, because to me, what you're asking is much more getting socially aligned. I mean, I don't want you to pay a therapist to get socially aligned. You could pay a therapist to get help with the grief, but the companionship that you need to have now, I think you still have to work it out with getting it from family.
And she also mentions in the chat, maybe suggestions to encourage family members to check in more often.
Yes, yes, yeah. And I think she said I took the words out of her mouth, so maybe that she was going in that direction. So that's a good direction.
Okay. We have a question. How can you explain death to a 4-year-old child? I ask this question because a grandmother told her grandson that his mother, who is dead, is sleeping in church.
Well, I will leave that to the child psychologist to answer. So I will turn this question over to Dr. Moore, and then I will help based on what Dr. Moore says.
Thank you, Sister Julie. I think it is maybe make things a little more confusing for the 4-year-old if they're told mommy is sleeping in church, because at that age, they're very literal. So they're going to go to church and look for mommy because mommy's sleeping in church. And if they don't find her in one church, they'll want to know which church she's sleeping in. And let's go to all the churches and wake up mommy. So they don't understand death the way older children and adults will, because they don't understand forever. And death is forever. They don't have that concept of time. They need to have a sense that the person is in some location, but not accessible to them. So they need, if this is a family that you mentioned church, so I imagine this is a family with faith. You can say that mommy was not well and could not get better, so she is now with God and she's in heaven. And once you're with God, that's where you stay. You don't come back, right? Because one question that I heard a sharp little child ask was, well, if God can do anything, why can't God fix my mommy and send her back? So you need to preclude that, to say to them clearly, once you go to God, that means your time here is finished. You've gone to God, you're staying with God, mommy is with God, and you can let them know that mommy will come to them in their dreams all the time. And they can see mommy in dreams. They can't see her otherwise. And that can be helpful. Sister Judy.
And they could talk to mommy as they talk to God. Because if I agree, Dr. Moore, if that's a family that have, use a faith-based, as part of their life orientation, the child at 4 would be saying prayers, talking to God. So he could talk to Granny likewise. Talk to God because Granny is with God. So talk to both of them.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, they can still talk, and little children will definitely do that.
Yeah.
We have a question. What happens when you literally feel as if you're losing your mind? You can't remain focused and forget basic things.
Well, there could be several reasons for that, but just let's deal with the reasons we're dealing with tonight. So if it is based because of trauma or grief, then I'd say try and work, get a therapist and really try and work with the trauma and the grief. Other than that, there are other things that you could try. If you go to the Franciscan Institute website, which I think Annalisa has put up, and you go to the YouTube page, you will find another variety that you can try. There's something there called Visio Divina, which is really using a piece of photography or some other piece of pitch art, and you're led through a very quiet meditation. And maybe that will help you focus, because you will find something that you can look at and try and focus. And Lisa's put up the thing in the chat, the YouTube page. And if that is not working for you, you can join on a third Sunday. I think the next one, I don't know, Annalisa may want to put up that up. You could join that group on the third Sunday of every month and see if that will help you with some focusing and quieting down and regaining of some short-term memory that you feel that you're losing. Yeah, so I would say start there. Start there. Or start with your own art, even just doodling, doodling is not a waste of time. It's a certain focus in a way when children doodle in classes, because most times the teacher is boring or what they say they're not understanding, and they doodle, but they're totally taken up by their doodling. So you could kind of doodle likewise.
Thank you. There's another question. Can the loss of one's husband cause the wife to be very bitter and consistently angry?
Of course. Of course. But try to see at who the anger and the bitterness is targeting, who it's pointed at. Some people are afraid, and I'm not saying you are, some people are really afraid to say that they're angry with God. But you can feel that God has taken away somebody from you too quickly, to whatever. And if there's anybody you could talk to your anger, talk about your anger with, is God. I might be afraid of you, quarreling with me, but God is not. Just go to the Psalms and you will see that. There are people in the Psalms, some Psalms I'm even afraid of praying. They say, bash the children's head against the wall, do this for us and do that for us. you know. So you could, if you're very angry, just try and figure out who you're angry at. Where is that? Where is that? You know, and begin, I would say begin there and start dealing with it. Are you angry at your husband, you know, for dying? Well, that's real. That's real, and you could get over that. That's real.
I'm just mentioning here that Tina also put in the chat that there's an online women's support group called the Our Empowerment Group. This is in Dominica, meeting 5 to 7 every Thursday. And she's put in a WhatsApp contact so that people can link into that.
Nice.
So that's a support resource in Dominica.
Thanks, Tina.
Other questions from anybody, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself and put forward any questions.
Can I just clarify? Oh, gosh. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Just, you can go ahead and type it in the chat, Tina. Oh, Tina is saying that it's available to anyone.
Anyone.
Okay, so I guess
from
it's available to
country.
anyone outside of Dominica as well. Okay, great, great.
Very good.
Right. Anything, any other questions from anyone? We have one. Can you remind us what are the best words to say to those who are grieving?
Well, it all depends on what stage of grief they're at. Sometimes, let me just give you one small example. I remember being called to a hospital where a lady had just given birth to a stillborn baby. And I went into her room. The doctor sent me into her room. And when I saw her, I know, look, I'm a nun. I've never had children. I could never say to this lady anything that would help her. Not at this stage, not after 2 minutes of losing a baby, stillborn. So I went into the room and I was really frightened, literally frightened, because I was conscious that I couldn't be of any help here. And I just stood up. I didn't know her, so I couldn't even touch her. And I just said, I have no words. I don't know your grief, but I know you're in pain. I have no words. And I stood quietly. I asked if you mind if I stand. And I stood quietly there with her. I was praying, not aloud, in myself, quietly. And then I said, tomorrow I'll check on you. And tomorrow I did. The day after I did. And you know what she said to me? She said to me, thank you. If yesterday, when you came, you had said anything, I was going to run your hell out of here. And I think the best response for anybody who is grieving is your own honesty. You don't know what to say? Say, I don't know what to say. You know, is there any way I can help? They might tell you, pray for me. They might tell you, reach out to this. But honesty, as we say, is the best policy. It is. Honesty is good. Don't pretend you know. Don't pretend you could fix it, because you can't. So just be honest. I don't have words. I don't have words. Don't tell people I know what you're feeling. You never know what they're feeling.
Thank you. We had another question. Someone saying she came in late, and could you recap the loving memory jar?
Oh, okay, the loving memory jar is just you know, any bottle you take and you really fix up nice, right? You make it look nice. Or you could buy a nice jar. And the love and memory, you know, things, if let's say you have children or anybody in the household, whatever they remember that is loving about the person that they did together or the person did for them, it could be both ways. It's always both ways, you know. You just write it and you just drop it in the jar. And then maybe for the person's birthday or death anniversary or some special time. Remember, I don't know if you were there when we were talking about anticipating, developing a plan where you anticipate the things that bring back the grief, right? You could use the things that are in the jar. You could take it out and you could read it. And, you know, each one could take something and read. And that's it. But you could use it in very positive ways. You could use it in family prayer. You could use it around the table when, you know, for the person's birthday or the death anniversary or however, you know. And the children could feel very free to add all the time to the love and memory jar.
I saw that Solomon had his hand up. He had put a hand up. So if he wants to ask his question now. Not hearing. Okay, all right. Oh, that was an error.
It was an error.
It was
Okay.
an error. Okay, okay.
Okay, I will like to go next. This week I had a really heartbreaking week. I learned that a young man is suffering from a kidney infection. And, you know, I'm always on the ground giving support. I went to see him. And when I saw him, I was like shocked. You know, this man was a very vibrant guy with his own business. And he was like literally just giving up, you know, and I'm like, wow. So what would you tell him? You see somebody there just literally just giving up.
Given up, did he tell you he's given up, or you're reading from his size?
Yes, I mean, I believe, yes. He said, like, you know, he's given up, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it all depends on the kind of relationship you have with him. You know, it will give you a way in. Let's say you don't have any relationship with him apart from just knowing him, you know, the conversation could just be, wow. So it feels that bad to you. It feels that to you, you know, and see where that goes. You know, no sense going and asking him, so why you want to give up? It ain't good to give up. Just say, you know, it feels that bad to you.
Yeah, so what I actually did, there was a young man who had a car accident and he actually sort of damaged his spine, and he was, you know, the doctors gave up on him, and I went to see him in hospital. He was all skinny, and I prayed for him. I said to him, this is not you, you know, you're a very energetic person, you will be back on your feet, you know. And the same guy who was suffering from the kidney infection said, yes, this guy is such an inspiration that he really pulled through, and now he's walking. So I think it ended well, that, you know what, even people give up on you, the main thing is you must not give up on yourself. You understand? And it's little bit by little bit, you can heal yourself, but moving forward steadily and you know, and you will get there in the end with patience.
And you could have made a subtle comparison and say, wow, you saw how hard he tried. So it means,
Yes, he did say he was inspired. He was inspired by that young man.
So that's where I'm taking off. That's where I'm taking off. So to say, wow, you saw how hard he tried. Yeah, you know, that's only what keeps us back from giving up, trying hard.
Trying hard. Sometimes when people give up on us, and when we don't give up on us, that is the main thing. We can heal ourselves and move forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question here. In Guyana and the Caribbean, I grew up hearing he or she died from a broken heart days or months after a spouse died. How can we support someone after their spouse dies?
in the way that you support anybody else in death, the thing is that what affects the way we really grieve is the depth of the relationship, the depth of the relationship. Or so it's either the depth of the relationship or the depth of the relationship we didn't have, that we now grieving that we didn't have. You know, sometimes what people are grieving about is different, huh? So I would start by asking the person, how can I help? You know, we assume people want a particular kind of help because it's grief. That might not always be so. It's always respectful to offer and to start with, you know, is there a way I can help you? You know, or is there anything you need, anything you want? You know, just know. So give people the assurance. Yeah, I would start there. You know, if you have a relationship with the person, you know, a friendship with the person, that's a different story. But if you don't have a friendship and relationship with the person, and yes, so you're working out of your empathy, well, just use your empathy and offer the help. You know, if you have a relationship, it's different. It pitches the empathy at a place almost of knowledge. The person know you. And they know what you can do and they know how you can help them. But if you don't have a relationship and you're coming in, you know, as a visitor, and or you know, just by the way, is the neighbor down the road, or is somebody you went to school with and you heard about the death, then you know, and it's a sad death by accident or whatever, then it's you have to start in a very genuine place, but very generic. But genuine, because people connect with what's real, what's true, what's genuine.
We have another one. What can explain openly crying in public for the first time for a father after 6 years of his passing during Father's Day Mass?
What could explain that?
Yeah.
Well, the only thing that could explain that is that they've just come to the awareness, and you know, maybe they couldn't cry all the time. You know, people think that you have to be able to cry. You have to be able to cry, and the world could be very cruel, and I'm answering that from a very personal place. I lost 2 siblings younger than myself because I'm the first child. And my brothers were crying. I'm the only girl, and I was not crying. And people were coming to our home because my mother's life was in danger likewise. And she was a very popular nurse in the village where we grew up. And they were coming to my home, and you know what they were saying? Imagine the boys crying and the girl ain't even crying. She have 1 daughter. To my ears, you know, they're saying that to my hearing. And nobody knew that my chest was as tight as a box and hard as a wall. And I was begging God, and seeing my brothers cry, I was wishing I could be like them. I can explain why I wasn't crying apart from the physical thing I was feeling. And I know I was wishing and praying to cry. So it took me a good few years to get there. Now the sisters who know me laugh at me. They even call me and say, "You're listening to the evening news? So what you doing now? You're crying or what?" You may laugh at that, but that's true. That's true. You know, we never know how things affect us. And because somebody didn't cry for 6 years and now they're crying, there's nothing unusual about that. You know, there are things that possibly did happen that they couldn't cry. Shock. You know?
Thank you. Someone is saying, I know there are earlier questions, but this seems connected to what was just asked. So I'm going to go to this one next and then go back to the earlier ones. I know someone who lost their father in their early 20s and they never cried. This person is now in their 50s and very closed off to others' feelings, emotions, and lives a very disconnected life. Would you suggest they revisit that time of great trauma to release that pain?
I would say revisit the trauma or any other traumas, but I don't know if we could use tears, the act of crying, as a measurement for anything. Because you don't cry don't mean that you're not experiencing sorrow, and it does not mean that you're not grieving. Because I don't laugh didn't mean that I'm not happy and I'm not celebrating what is going on. I might be feeling extremely contented inside. But just because I'm not laughing, it doesn't mean that I'm not happy. But it's the same thing with tears. Because I'm not crying, it doesn't mean that I'm not sad and grieving. So let us not use that as the only gauge.
We have another question regarding your response to an earlier question that someone experiencing multiple traumas at the same time should find a therapist and start to deal with them. How is that person to be encouraged to do so, especially when some of the traumas are so recent and raw that he or she has almost completely shut down to everyone around them?
Okay, well, if again, life is about relationship. If there is a relationship there, or you know somebody else that is very close to that person and would respect that person and not make them feel badly for the way they're acting or how we perceive them as shut down or whatever, be the person that will intervene with a very close friend, somebody very trusting to that person, and say, you know, I noticed that, but I am not that close to make that contact. But could you do that on your behalf, on my behalf, on her behalf? You know, and invite her, you know, to talk or to get some help, you know. And it's best to always describe the behaviors you see, because that is the only thing that's non-judgmental. To say, you know, you used to laugh so much. I don't see you laughing anymore. Do you notice that about yourself? Or you used to do this and I don't see you doing this anymore, you know, rather than that's what you become. You used to be different. You know, I think people hear these things as harsh, you know, but if we're trying to get somebody help, I always go, and the person is not accepting it, try and get the person who is closest to them, who they trust and who would respect them. Those two things need to go hand in hand. Because it's an intervention you're doing. And that's how you will do an intervention. You look for people who are close to this person, who are meaningful in their life, and you coach them to be respectful, you know, and to go in and say, this is what we care about you. We want you to get this kind of help. You know, we see you really deteriorating with the drinking and, you know, or what have you, you know, so we have this place for you to go in the story. So it's something very similar.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this point? Because it's close to the time for us to close up. One more, and I think we'll take this one as the last one because not all of us may be aware, but Sister Julie is in Rome, so she's 6 hours ahead of the rest of us, and we're going to let her get her sleep after this. So this last one is, would you say that grief and depression can overlap? They're not two separate entities, right?
You can have some similar symptoms, and yes, in that sense, they can overlap, but they are not one and the same thing. Because you could be dealing with depression that is biological, you know. You could be dealing with depression that is, you know, for other reasons, you know. Inverted anger causes a lot of depression.
Okay, I think that is it. So on behalf of the Franciscan Institute Trauma Team, we really want to thank Sister Julie tonight for doing this presentation for us. We know that she has worked in this field for a really long time. She's the director of the Institute and the director of the Trauma Team. And we know that this has been powerful. Our aim in doing this is to support people, educate, give tools, because we can't do our usual outreach where we would physically go to territories. We are all in the midst of the pandemic. So this is a natural disaster, a man-made disaster or a natural one, whichever you want to call it. And we are still trying to carry out our aim to support territories. And we, Sister Julie, we really, really, really appreciate it. We appreciate that you're up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And we appreciate that coming from the Caribbean, you always have that big heart for the Caribbean and are always ready to reach out and support in whatever way possible. And we also want to thank everyone who has attended and who has stayed with this. It's Friday, it's the end of the week, and we've had a really good attendance here, and we're very thankful to everybody for coming. Those who haven't noticed it, there's a link to the YouTube channel in the chat. This session today, Annalise is putting in the chat, today's recording will be posted on the Franciscan Institute YouTube channel, and she's putting the link in again. So the link has just gone in the chat again, so you can access it. Probably within the next few days, you'll be able to access it. There are the other offerings that we have had are also on there, on that YouTube channel. So you can go there for the recording and to look at it and go over questions or material or anything like that. So I think we're getting some very appreciative comments in the chat. So thank you all, everybody. We're really glad that it has been useful for everybody. And I think we're at the close here.
Close, yeah.
And we wish you all a very good night and a very good weekend. And please all stay safe with COVID-19.
Yes. And thank you very, very much, everyone. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Moore, thank you for being here likewise. Yes, thanks.
And thank you,
Good night.
Annalisa and Amy,
Thanks,
for
Annalisa and Amy.
facilitating
Yes.
this.
Yes, thank you. Tina, thanks. Thanks for
Good night.
organizing everybody. Good night.
Yes, thank you, Tina, for really organizing.